13 million undocumented immigrants live in our country. Most have been here for a long period of time. They are healthcare workers, teachers, farm workers, small business owners. They pay taxes, nearly $50 billion a year, they did in 2022. And many, like one of our witnesses today, grew up alongside our children and grandchildren with the same dreams of a first job, a driver's license, and college acceptance. Let's get down to the bottom line. I hope we can all agree that any undocumented immigrant found guilty of a serious crime should not be allowed to stay here, or if we have knowledge, they should not be allowed to come into this country, period. Ms. Morin, I read your testimony this morning, touched my heart. Your loss of your daughter, I know you'll talk about at some length. That is a tragedy which we all lament and look on with sadness. And we don't want to allow that kind of individual who damaged your family so terribly in this country in the first place, period. In his first term, President Trump deported dreamers who came to the U.S. as children. He deported veterans who had served our nation. He deported essential workers who care for our families, build our homes, and make sure we have food on the table in the morning. It was an undocumented worker who was watching your grandchild this morning at the daycare center. Undocumented worker who walked carefully with your mother back to her room after breakfast so she didn't fall down. It was an undocumented worker with that leaf blower in your front yard over the weekend. Now, President-elect Trump has pledged that on the first day of his new administration, he will declare a national emergency and use our military as part of a mass deportation plan. I've made a living out of politics, as have my colleagues at the table here. During the course of the campaign, you can make promises. Sometimes they come true and sometimes they don't. The notion of Mexico building a wall on our southern border was repeated over and over again. It didn't happen. There was an extension of the wall on our border, but Mexico didn't pay for it. Things change when you go from high-flying campaign rhetoric to ground. Think about for a moment using our military for a mass deportation plan. I'm sure it would have a damaging impact on the morale of the troops, rounding up people in their own communities at a time when we're already facing the most serious recruitment challenge in years. Listen to the words of Stephen Miller, who now has been promoted to a higher level position, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy for incoming President Trump. Here's what Stephen Miller said. In terms of personnel, you go to the red state governors and you say, give us your National Guard. We will deputize them as immigration enforcement officers. And if you're going to go into an unfriendly state like Maryland, Stephen Miller said, well, there would just be Virginia doing the arrests in Maryland, right? Very close, very nearby. Almost a nonchalant attitude toward the notion of sending National Guard from one state to the other to end up sending people out of this country. In addition to weakening our military, it would cost hundreds of billions of dollars to deport every undocumented immigrant in our country. It would damage our economy and separate American families. Instead, we should focus on deporting those who are truly a danger to America, and we should give the rest a chance to earn legal status. They would have to register with the government, certainly pay their taxes, and submit to serious background checks. Most Americans, nearly 2 out of 3, agree we should give lawful status to undocumented immigrants who don't pose a threat to our country. That's what we did in 2013. A bipartisan group of 8 senators, including myself and Ranking Member Graham, drafted a bill to reform our immigration laws and secure our border. 2013 it was. That bill passed the Senate 68-32. Unfortunately, it wasn't taken up by the House of Representatives and the Republican majority. The notion behind that was that everyone would be under requirement to come forward and identify themselves to the government, all the undocumented people in this country. And if they identified themselves, went through a background check, paid their taxes, they could continue to live and work here without fear of deportation. In our bill, over a long period of time, and a really long period of time, they could be on a path to legality and citizenship. That's a starting point that I think makes sense. Not mass deportation, but mass accountability, so we know who's here. And how would it make a difference? We would go to E-Verify to make sure that if you didn't go through that process in our bill, you couldn't legally work in the United States. So there was an enforcement. It was serious. I'm glad I was part of that effort, and I hope we can return to the discussion. Over the weekend, President-elect Trump, I watched his interview on Meet the Press. He said some positive things from my point of view. And he really challenged us on the Democratic side to work with him when it came to the Dreamers. I accept the challenge. Name the time and place, Mr. President. I'll be there. The reality is that Congress, for almost 40 years, has failed to fix our broken immigration system. We've had opportunities to do it. I hope we can find more in the future. We should use our 2013 immigration bill as a starting point instead of mass deportations. As I said, mass accountability. Let's fix our broken immigration system in a way that protects our country and honors our heritage as a nation of immigrants. Now I recognize Senator Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. From our point of view over here, one of the primary issues facing the American people in 2024 for president and other elections, who is best able to control a broken border? Most Americans are sympathetic, kind-hearted people who feel like the Biden administration was criminally negligent in protecting us by having a broken border and allowing drugs to pour into our country to kill tens of thousands of young people, allow people to come in our country who are convicted felons to do damage to families we'll hear from today. That nightmare is coming to a close. In January of 2025, the Republican Senate will make its top priority a transformational border security bill that will be taken up and passed by the Budget Committee, increasing the number of bed spaces available to detain people instead of releasing them, increasing the number of ICE agents to deal with people who should be deported, finish the wall, and put technology on the border so we'll have operational control of the border. That's going to be our top priority. I want to cut taxes, but we'll cut taxes. But as to the Senate, transformational border security goes first through reconciliation. Over 8 million people were encountered during the Biden years, 4 million released into the country. The non-detained docket that we have as a nation is over 7 million people. There are 600 and something thousand people on that non-detained document that have criminal records. We're going to start sending people out of the country that present a threat to us and should never have been here to begin with. The politics of immigration and broken borders, according to a couple of Democratic senators, was outcome determinative. I think they're right. So as much as I respect and admire the chairman, I think your focus is misplaced here. You should be working with us to clean up this mess. You should want mass deportations of people here illegally that represent threats to our country. How did we get to where we're at? The average annual deportation for Obama and Trump was about the same. Along comes Biden, it drops like a rock. So when you have people show up and by the millions, and the number of people being deported goes down by 40-something%, you're incentivizing more people to come. It is our belief that the only way you'll get control of the border is for deportations to start early so people will not pay the money to the coyotes and others to come to our border in the first place because they see people leaving, not staying. If we do not have outflow, the inflow will continue. An example of a broken immigration system was the abuse of parole by the Biden administration. mass parole of people who did not meet the two criteria under the parole statute. The man who's been convicted of killing Laken Riley was paroled into the country because there was no bed space. There's nothing in the statute that allows parole because we have no place to put you. There are 38,000 beds. We're going to increase that dramatically. One of the witnesses here today, his family was destroyed by a man who had been deported 3 times. The 4th time was not a charge. So if you're here illegally, get ready to leave. If you're a criminal, we're coming after you first. If you've been paroled illegally, we're not going to give you the roots to attach yourself to our country because you should not have been here in the first place. As to the dreamers, hopefully we can find a solution to that problem. What I want to do is regain control of a broken border really quickly. The highest number of people on the terrorist watch list in our country exists today. I hope that number will go down pretty quickly. I know Senator Cornyn's on the Intel Committee. In many ways, a broken immigration system has created a ticking time bomb for our national security. So yes, the Republican Party will pass as its top priority border security, more bed spaces so you don't have to release people that shouldn't be released, and more ICE agents to deport people who represent a threat to our country and shouldn't be here to begin with. We're going to do that. And to my Democratic friends, I think if you resist rational deportation policy, you do so at your own peril. 86% of the people deported under the Trump first term were involved with criminal convictions or pending criminal matters. I have never seen such a mess. It's time to clean that mess up. So come January, help is on the way.
Thank you, Senator Graham. We have an immigration subcommittee, and chairing that committee is Senator Padilla, and ranking member is Senator Cornyn. They each asked for a chance to make an opening statement. I recognize Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Graham. I want to thank each and every one of the witnesses that are here today for obviously a timely and important discussion, but taking place during an uncertain and unnerving time for many in our nation's history. I'm going to deviate for a second from my prepared remarks just to acknowledge what Senator Graham has begun to lay out. Look, this topic, this issue is certainly complex. It doesn't do the issue and the challenge justice to just say, well, there's so many immigrants in America, or some people say illegal, some people say undocumented immigrants in America, when you really must break it down into a number of categories. Are there some number that beyond being in the country undocumented may be involved with unlawful activities? Yes, and I don't think you're going to find Democrats saying we shouldn't be pursuing actions against violent criminals. But when Senator Graham also suggests, but I hope we can take care of the dreamers. Dreamers, as you all know, young people who were brought here by their parents at a very young age, but have grown up here and are undocumented. Are they also on the target list for deportation, or not, because we look at them in a different category? I've had Republican colleagues want to cooperate and collaborate on legal status and pathways to citizenship for farm workers, for example. And I get back to them and other essential workers in America, but just because you're undocumented, does that mean you are on the target list? Yes or no? Or are we going to have the maturity and act responsibly to kind of break down a complex conversation? Because number one, yes, Democrats believe we need an orderly, safe, and humane border. Number two, yes, we should not hesitate to pursue enforcement actions against violent criminals. But let's be clear what we're talking about today. This hearing is on the eve of the next Donald Trump administration. And we've heard him for months and months and months now throughout the campaign trail, promise mass deportations. We heard him over and over again commit to, quote, the largest deportation operation in American history. And we've had big ones. For folks watching at home, Google Operation Wetback and begin to do some homework. We've even heard Donald Trump say that there will be no price tag for deportations, and heard him promise on Truth Social to use the United States military to execute it. Now, I can already hear some of the rebuttals from Republican colleagues to suggest that, well, he doesn't really mean all immigrants. He's only talking about violent criminals. Well, I wish I could believe that he's only committing to targeting violent criminals, because we agree on that front. But pardon me if I'm skeptical, we've seen Donald Trump in the past and how he operates. Do you remember the Muslim bans he imposed early in his first term? And the family separations at the border that we witnessed for years? So I've seen enough to know that while he may plan to prioritize, in effect, he will be targeting all undocumented immigrants, which will inevitably include those without criminal convictions of any type. Now, previous administrations of both parties, we saw some stats being presented. It's been the policy of previous administrations to prioritize the deportation of those with criminal convictions. But what we're hearing from incoming President Trump isn't that. And look at who he is putting in these pivotal roles to help him execute. A loyalist in Christine Ohm at DHS, extremist Stephen Miller as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, and Tom Homan as border czar, who told undocumented immigrants through the press, quote, you should be afraid, end quote. Dreamers, farm workers, that's the message. And he promised worksite raids to prosecute anyone who stands in their way. They're pushing an extremist agenda. On top of the fact that, like, separating spouses and ripping away children from their parents, citizen children from sometimes undocumented immigrant parents, isn't just cruel. It's not just morally wrong. Here's another very important reason why Americans should be concerned. For anybody whose vote this last November was motivated by high prices of food, of housing, of anything else, understand that the mass deportation Donald Trump is describing will be disastrous to our economy. Again, I'm not trying to justify those involved with criminal activity. We're on all the same page there. I'm talking about nonviolent criminal, undocumented immigrants. It is all of us, the American people, who will pay for the extremism policies that he has promised. Put aside the millions and millions and millions of dollars to find undocumented immigrants he may be targeting, to detain and to remove through the process of deportation. For a minute, don't even count on the funds that will be necessary to hire thousands of Border Patrol and ICE agents, let alone the cost of constructing detention centers and jails for this operation. Let's focus on the impacts to the economy for American families. Because the fact is, there are millions of undocumented immigrants living in the United States today who are working in industries critical to our entire economy. Undocumented immigrants make up nearly 15% of all construction workers, for example, and roughly half of our agricultural workforce. Again, if you care about the cost of housing, you care about food prices at the grocery store, you should be paying attention. Because if tomorrow Stephen Miller could snap his fingers and have his way, our annual GDP would drop roughly 6.8%. Imagine all the losses of the Great Recession and then still shrinking the economy another 2.5 points. So what does that mean for folks at home? It's simple. Any industry with a significant percentage of undocumented immigrants will have a harder time finding workers. And I know we've all been hearing from employers and business leaders for years now about their struggle already to find sufficient workforce. Stores will have a harder time keeping the shelf stocked, and yes, prices will rise and rise and rise. So hello, America. Get ready for a more expensive food bill when you're preparing next year's Thanksgiving dinner or next year's Christmas dinner. And if you've been saving up for years and years to try to buy your first home, get ready to wait even longer because construction will slow and prices will go up. So the next time we hear Republicans say that they support Trump's plan to deport waves of undocumented immigrants, let's be clear about what comes with that. Higher prices for American families. They're supporting the forced removal of millions of hardworking community members, 80% of whom have lived here 10 years or more. These are not recent arrivals. People who have lived here for years, if not decades. They're supporting fear and uncertainty in immigrant communities that will cause untold numbers of immigrants, no matter their status, to stay home from work, from school, from shopping. And they're supporting the punishment of over 5 million workers who Donald Trump's own administration declared to be, quote, essential to our economy. Essential workers who fed us and kept us safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you agree with the spirit of at least that segment deserves better, then colleagues join me in supporting the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, the essential workers that the Trump administration deemed critical to our nation's economy and security. Let's provide them with some legal status up front and a pathway to earn citizenship because we need them. Our economy needs farm workers. I think you'd agree. Our economy needs construction workers, hospitality and transportation workers, healthcare workers, and students and innovators who help keep our economy and our country thriving. We don't need the massive deportations that the political rhetoric of the campaign cycle has brought us. And we certainly don't need the uncertainty, the fear, and the loss that we'll feel for years to come. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses and to today's conversation.
Thanks, Senator Padilla. Senator Cornyn?
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. Listening to my Democratic colleagues, it's as if November 5th never occurred, that we haven't had an election, that we haven't had a referendum on the failed border policies of the Biden-Harris administration. Let's be clear, the crisis at the southern border is entirely a problem caused by the Biden administration's policies. It is a man-made disaster. The election, I believe, in large part was a referendum on those policies, and the American people spoke decisively, rejecting this as the new normal. They rejected lawlessness as the new normal. When President Biden came into office, Customs and Border Protection was apprehending about 70,000 illegal migrants a month. President Biden came in and reversed virtually all of the Trump administration policies, including canceling our agreements with Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries to limit illegal immigration. President Biden also attempted to impose a 100-day moratorium on all deportations. By March, illegal crossings had ballooned to 170,000 per month, up from 70,000, and then climbed progressively higher from there. Then the president used his executive authority to implement new guidelines that made clear to illegal immigrants that DHS was extremely unlikely to take any action against them until their conduct became especially egregious. Even so, criminal aliens were able to get away with a lot before any action would be taken. Take, for example, the tragic case of Rachel Morin, a mother of 5 who was raped and murdered by an illegal migrant. Her killer crossed the border illegally in February of 2023. He was suspected of committing multiple crimes even before he took her life. This tragedy and others like it could have been prevented were it not for President Biden's willful refusal to enforce the law. The truth of the matter is, President Biden's willful neglect of border security and public safety has created immense suffering for American families. And his administration is fully responsible for the fact that we have to hold this hearing today. The American people are fed up with the lawlessness at the southern border, and in November they tasked Republicans the job of cleaning it up, and that we will do. We have a big job ahead of us, no doubt, but by one estimate, there are already 1.3 to 1.6 migrants who are under final orders of deportation who are still in the country. That strikes me as a good place to start. People who've been entitled to full due process and hearing in front of an immigration court and are under final orders of deportation. What are they still doing here? Well, it's because of the Biden administration's willful neglect of the law and enforcement. By my calculations, the Biden administration has released at least 3.6 million illegal migrants over the southern border. And during the same 4 years, Border Patrol recorded an additional 1.7 million gotaways. Those are people willfully evading law enforcement. As of 2022, more than 1 million illegal immigrants have received final orders of removal, but were still present in the United States, and that has now ballooned to about 1.3 million plus. As of July 21st, 2024, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, had more than 660,000 criminal aliens on its national docket. I look forward to doing what the American people voted for on November 5th, which is to restore the law and enforcement of the law as the new normal in America, unlike the last 4 years. And it's going to require us to do a lot of work to clean up the mess left by the previous administration's policies. We have to make it absolutely clear to prospective illegal immigrants that we will enforce our immigration laws. We will not accept illegal border crossings as the new normal. What we will accept is lawful, orderly, humane immigration policies. We are the most generous country in the world when it comes to naturalizing people coming to our country, roughly 1 million people a year. That's the right way to do it, not the way the Biden administration had it done. We will follow through on the orders of removal by immigration courts, and again, we will not accept lawlessness and criminality in the United States as the new normal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator.